All right, good afternoon, and welcome to our live stream panel discussion on the Pump Act. I'm Stacey Davis. I'm the director for the Center of Innovative Practices in WIC at the National WIC Association, and I'm honored to be your moderator for today's critical panel discussion. Before we dive into our panel discussion, I want to take a moment to welcome our esteemed panelists. First, we have Stephanie Hodges, a public health dietitian and consultant at 1,000 Days. Next, we have Cheryl Lebedevich, Senior Policy and Communications Manager at the United States Breastfeeding Committee. And we also have Sarah Braffman, the National Policy Director at Better Balance. And from Work Life Law, we have Jessica Lee, Senior Staff Attorney at the Center for Work Life Law, UC College of Law, San Francisco. Throughout this panel, we will explore what the PUMP Act is and its complexities of it, while highlighting the unique opportunity the PUMP Act has too. Together with our esteemed panelists, we will explore the intricacies of the PUMP Act and its potential impact on breastfeeding support for communities served by WIC. With that said, we will go ahead and kick it off by asking our first questions. We will answer questions throughout the panel discussion, but try and hold off and leave the last 10 to 15 minutes for questions at that point. All right. So, welcome everyone. Thank you for joining today. We appreciate you guys taking the time out of your busy schedules to join NWA and NWA members. And I will lead off my first question with Stephanie. Stephanie, what is the PUMP Act? And prior to the passage of the PUMP Act, what was the status quo?
Thanks so much for starting us off with this great question. The PUMP Act has really been instrumental in closing a loophole and unintentional mistakes that was passed in a 2010 bill called the Break Time for Nursing Mothers Act. Previously, protections only extended to hourly workers who qualified for overtime under the Fair Labor Standards Act. But even then, it actually restricted any restitution workers could seek. And so if workers wanted to sue their employer for not being able to have these accommodations, there was no legal mechanism to do so. Now, the majority of those covered has expanded to include salaried workers like teachers and nurses, most of whom are women, in addition to some hourly workers, also like farm workers and home care aides. Also, it clarifies that the pumping time counts as time worked when calculating a minimum wage and overtime if an employee is not completely relieved from their work duties during the pumping break.
Thank you for that. Would anybody else like to elaborate on the status quo or have anything to add to what Stephanie said before we move on?
Yeah, I think Stephanie gave a great summary of this whole situation that we were in. Folks were not covered. We did a report in 2019 where we crunched the numbers and we found that under that old law, even though it was wonderful for so many workers, it gave a lot of workers the ability to take lactation breaks. It was leaving out 1 in 4 women workers of childbearing age. That's about 9 million workers were just not covered, did not have that right to lactation break time and space before the Pump Act. And as Stephanie really rightly pointed out, the ability to sue, to take those complaints to court, to actually get your needs met, get justice was extremely limited. And so in that kind of environment, a lot of employers just provided nothing for anyone. Some gave lactation break time and space to some of their workers, but not others. So, for example, teachers were left out. So, some of the front office staff would have a right to lactation breaks, but in many states, teachers had nothing. And because they didn't really see this law being enforced, a lot of employers just kind of wrote it off and didn't take workers' needs seriously. So in that environment, we saw folks just struggling daily to get the break times they needed. Some were told to pump in a bathroom, pump in a freezing cold space that is just not suitable for anyone, let alone someone with their top off. We saw workers told that essentially they had to choose between continuing breastfeeding, pumping at work, or their job, which is a situation that nobody should ever be put in. And of course is damaging to that family, to that worker, and to our whole community when we're pushing new parents out of work. So that's where we were before, but I'm so grateful for the advocacy of the folks here on this call, and so many of you watching who spoke up for these lactating workers, who said it's not fair to force someone just back to work after giving birth to have to choose between their health, the health of their baby, and their paycheck. And now we have a really transformative law here that makes it so that employees across the country have these new protections.
Yes. But that will take us on to our next question, which I will pose to Jess and ask Jess, what is the landscape of existing laws protecting the right to express breast milk at work, and what does those laws look like?
Yeah, so before this year, we had a real patchwork. Like I said, 1 in 4 folks were left out of the national lactation protections. That's gone. That's changed. Now, just about every employer in the country, with some very small exceptions, are small but important exceptions, are covered. So we no longer have that patchwork. Before, there was also some state laws. Every state law was different. In one state, the employer might be encouraged to provide breaks, and another, they'd have to provide breaks and a refrigerator and a sink, and have that space be close to the worker's work site. So employers were really confused and struggling with a lot of different requirements that didn't always line up. But now we have the Pump Act, which applies across the country. It applies even though states have their own law. The Pump Act sets the floor. You absolutely cannot go lower than that, regardless of what the state law says. And I should mention there's also another law that also came out this year, which is really important, the Pregnant Workers Fairness Act, which also kind of changes this landscape here. So we are really working in a new world where there isn't this patchwork. Folks are not going to be falling through the cracks like they were before. And employers have some really clear, explicit guidance to follow on how to treat their lactating workers right.
Just to pause from that, because I'm sure there are some folks who are not familiar with the Pregnancy Fairness Act. Can you tell us a little more about that briefly?
Yeah, so the Pregnant Workers Fairness Act requires employers with 15 or more employees across the nation in any state to provide changes when a worker needs it due to pregnancy related conditions. So that's anything from fertility treatment to pregnancy complications or symptoms like morning sickness, all the way to what we're seeing after birth, postpartum depression, or lactation needs, which I know is why we're all here today. So workers are entitled to request changes that they need at work, and their employer has to provide it unless it's going to cause their employer an undue hardship in light of all the resources available to the employer. So we use that pretty regularly now to require employers to provide lactation breaks. But I think that law is really cool because it covers everything beyond break time and space. So we're going to talk about the Pump Act today, which requires that very clear definition of lactation space and break time to use it, which I think we'll get into in a second. But if there's anything else, right, like a different uniform, a change in schedule, a change in where somebody is working that's going to help them meet their lactation goals, or is going to respond to complications or symptoms that they're experiencing as a result of pregnancy or postpartum conditions, they're going to have protection for that too. So that could be its own session. There's a lot going on there, but I think the takeaway message is that the rules that we had in place last year, the way we did things even just a year ago, those are gone. Those days are over. Um, and we now have a lot of tools in our toolkit. So if you're a pregnant worker or someone who's breastfeeding, or you're working with folks who are, don't think that the old rules apply. There are opportunities to get any change that you need to protect your health, regardless of what state you're in, regardless of how much money you make or what type of position you're in. There's a path now for getting those needs met. And I think we're going to talk more about break time and space, but just know the old rules are gone. And I think all of us here on this call would be really eager to help you figure out how to use the new rules to get exactly what you need at any point of your pregnancy and lactation journey.
Thank you for that, Jess. I know it's hugely important, just thinking about my own experiences and just thinking about, my pregnancy with my 14-year-old, and thinking that I couldn't, like, when it was time to have him, like, I had to just be unpaid. I couldn't collect unemployment. There was no opportunities, for me to do another job. So I know this is hugely important to those who are in similar positions, and knowing that now they have protections and options to support themselves, but also be able to support their families, because we know that's huge, especially in communities of color, having to choose between being a parent and being able to take care of your family on a day-to-day basis. Okay. Sarah, I'm going to move on to you and ask you, what new protections are guaranteed by the Pump Act, and what do breastfeeding workers need to know?
Thanks so much, Stacey. All right, so we're going to get into it and really talk about the nitty-gritty of what these protections are. And Stephanie talked about it, and Jess both gave us a really good primer and intro on the protections. So what is the Pump Act? Who has these rights, and how can people enforce them? So there are two main features of the law. The first part is reasonable break time to pump milk at work. And the really important aspect of the reasonable break time piece is that it's reasonable break time each time a worker needs it at work. So there is nothing prescribed in the law about employers being able to say, well, you can only take X number of breaks, or you have to take your breaks at a fixed time. Employers need to provide the space each time the worker needs it. So they can't require workers to stick to a fixed pumping break schedule to meet business needs. They must give workers the breaks each time they are needed. So that's number one. Number two is the private space. The important aspects of that are, number one, it cannot be a bathroom, right? No one eats their lunch in the bathroom. Your baby's lunch should not have to be made in the bathroom. The other aspect of it, and the Department of Labor, which enforces the Pump Act, has said very clearly in a field bulletin that they put out to employers after the law was passed, that the space has to be a functional space for pumping. So what does a functional space for pumping mean? It means that the space has to contain a place for the nursing worker to sit. It has to contain a flat surface other than the floor so that someone can put their pump on top of the surface. Employees have to be able to safely store their milk while they're at work. So that could mean having an insulated food container, being allowed to bring a personal cooler, having access to a shared refrigerator or a designated refrigerator, but that the space has to be a functional space. As Jess alluded to also, employers, and this is really important, employers of all sizes nationwide have to comply with the Pump Act. Some folks may have heard about something called an undue hardship exemption. When it comes to the Pump Act, only employers with fewer than 50 employees, that's 50, can even claim to say that providing break time or space causes an undue hardship, meaning large employers, any employer that has 50 or more employees has to comply with the Pump Act, full stop. They can't claim that it's too hard, too difficult. The smaller employers can, but the DOL has also been very clear that even for those smaller employers, it's pretty rare that they're going to find that it's too difficult to provide this time or space for people to pump, because there are so many different ways that employers can comply. It's not one size fits all. It's not that you have to build a 1,500 square foot lactation space, although if employers want to do that, we welcome it. But that there is really a wide variety of ways for employers to comply. So even those small employers really should be complying, because that undue hardship is rare. What we hear often, and A Better Balance runs a helpline, which we'll talk about, Center for Work-Life Law also runs a helpline. We hear from a lot of workers whose employers are saying, they work for large employers, and their employers are saying, it's too difficult for me to do this, so I'm just not going to. And that is a violation of the law. And so let's talk about what a violation of the law means. And as Stephanie alluded to earlier, part of the problem with the break time for nursing mothers law, which passed with the ACA, was that it really had no enforcement mechanism. So even the people that were covered by the law really had no way to remedy violations. That landscape has completely changed. Now the DOL has the capacity to enforce the law. And on top of that, folks can file lawsuits if they have experienced violations and get real money damages back for any loss, and if there's been retaliation, etc. And what's really important to know is there are some agencies where you need, and some types of laws, like folks may be familiar with the civil rights law, where you have to go to the agency first before you can bring a lawsuit in court. That is not the case with the Pump Act. You don't first need to file a complaint with the DOL before going to court. So you can go straight to court if you experience a violation of the Pump Act. And that's why we also will talk about the helplines, but encourage folks, if they have questions about that, to come to us, because there's always particularities there, and there's some particularities in the Pump Act as well. But it's really important for folks to know that. Now, like Jess said, there is also, two buckets of laws that I want to mention on top of the Pump Act are the fact that the state laws will remain in effect. So all the state laws that do require break time and space, and sometimes require even employers to provide even more than what the Pump Act requires, are still in effect. So in certain states, employers have obligations to comply with both the federal law and the state law. In fact, in many states, because there are break time and space laws in many states. One of the most important features of some of these laws is that the Pump Act provides this right for up to 1 year after a child's birth. So this right is through the first year of birth. However, there are some states, like New York State, for instance, the law requires that employers provide this time for longer than a year. So New York actually requires that employers provide it for up to 3 years after childbirth. And so it's really important that people know about their rights under a variety of laws, because folks may have more protections even than the Pump Act. And the same with the Pregnant Workers Fairness Act. The Pregnant Workers Fairness Act, like Jess mentioned, is another new federal law. The name confuses people sometimes because it makes you think, oh, it's only for people who are pregnant, but it's not. It's for people throughout their reproductive lives, including lactation and accommodations for lactation. So if someone were to need both break time and space and, let's say, a uniform change because they're pumping, the Pregnant Workers Fairness Act could come in and kind of work in line with the Pump Act. So the Pump Act is providing the break time and space, and then the uniform change the person can get under the Pregnant Workers Fairness Act. The other thing about the Pregnant Workers Fairness Act is that break time and space is also an accommodation under the Pregnant Workers Fairness Act. So you have two laws, federal laws, that are providing this right to break time and space. But the Pregnant Workers Fairness Act does not have that 1-year timestamp. So if you're in a state where there's not a state law that's kind of buttressing the Pump Act to provide more time, you can overlay the Pregnant Workers Fairness Act if a person potentially wants to pump for more than a year, or wants to potentially do direct breastfeeding. So there's a lot about these two new federal laws that really work in tandem. So I know we titled the presentation Pump Act, but that's why we're really stressing both of these laws, because really people don't live their lives in terms of the names of the laws. They live their lives in terms of what's available to me, what rights I have. And these two laws are working very much together to provide a very strong new paradigm of laws. So let me stop there. I just threw a lot out, but we also have a lot of resources among our organizations with lots of information and even state-specific information. So don't feel like this is the last that you'll hear about all of these rights and how they work, because we will throw lots of information at you so that you can have that for your own purposes and follow up with us.
Thank you. I'll say, Sarah, I'm overwhelmed by the information. I'm not pregnant, don't plan to be pregnant, not breastfeeding, don't plan on breastfeeding, and I'm overwhelmed. And so I can just imagine how folks these laws apply to are just overwhelmed by the information if they're listening to us today. And or even if they read it somewhere, or someone is sharing the information with them. And I'll pose this to you and Jess. So, where are they going to get this information from? Like, who is going to be working on their behalf, advocating for them? Where can they learn more? Who's asserting their rights, and what recourse do they have if their rights are violated?
So I'm happy to kick off, and then Jess and others, please jump in. And I'm sorry, I'm not able to post comments in the chat, but so a couple of things. Number one, A Better Balance and the Center for Work-Life Law both run free legal helplines staffed by attorneys who can answer questions, any question, individualized questions about a worker's particular situation. So any worker from across the country can call either of our helplines, speak to an attorney about their individual situation, and get tailored information and tailored answers to their questions. So if there's one takeaway, it's that if you have a thought and it's like, oh, I think probably I need to know more about the Pump Act, or maybe I should put one of my clients in touch to learn more, just take down our helplines and call us, because we can provide this information. The other resource that we really want to highlight is that the Center for Work-Life Law and A Better Balance have put together a resource called Talking to Your Boss About Your Pump. And these are state-by-state guides. So we have 50 plus of these guides on both of our websites. And what they are basically like it's almost like having a lawyer or a friend give you a sort of bullet of how to have the conversation with your employer. So it's not just the laws, although we talk about your rights and talk about your laws, but providing this guidance on how to start the conversation, what to mention, when to have the conversation. So it's really a level, if we want to be there, holding your hand, helping guide conversations, so that people don't feel confused and overwhelmed and alone. So those are two really important resources that we want to highlight, which is number one, our free legal helplines, which if we can't share in the comments, we will share in a follow-up, I'm sure. And then these Talking to Your Boss About Your Pump guidance documents. And those are state specific. So they'll encompass both the federal law, the Pump Act, the PWFA, and these additional state laws, which might give folks some additional rights.
Thanks, Sarah. And I'm sure we'll try to figure out how to get this in the chat, but you can find those at pregnantatwork.org or betterbalance.org. I think you should be able to find it from the main page of the site from Work-Life Law and A Better Balance. But I gotta say, Stacey, I'm with you. It's a lot. I'm a lawyer, right? And it's a lot of information. Um, but I want to reassure folks that when you're asking for what you need at work, in relation to breastfeeding, lactation, you don't have to use magic words, right? There is no secret recipe. Sarah and I have spent a lot of time making sure our guides are as tight as can be and giving you those words that are going to trigger all the legal protections we can think of. But if you're talking with someone right now today who is who needs lactation break time and space, or maybe that's you, you don't have to memorize the law. You don't have to give some sort of legal citation to get what you need. The first step really is to just articulate what you need and ask for it. If you can say, there's new laws out there, like the Pump Act or the Pregnant Workers Fairness Act, that can certainly help. But I think the bottom line is that the vast majority of workers and the vast majority of situations are now protected. And so you don't need to memorize this. You don't have to use some sort of magic words. You don't need to be a lawyer, but do know that the law has your back. So if somebody is to ask for lactation break time and space, whether they mention the Pump Act or not, and their employer doesn't give it to them, again, please, please, please reach out. The Center for Work-Life Laws helpline is here for you. A Better Balances helpline is here for you. They're both free. They're both confidential. They both have lawyers on the other end of the line. And we can help you understand your rights and options. But typically, it could mean filing a complaint with the Department of Labor's Wage and Hour Division. They are investigating violations of the Pump Act, and their investigation can be pretty significant. If an employer is under investigation for violating the Pump Act, the Department of Labor could also look at all of their other wage issues, right? Everything's on the table. It is pretty serious, so not to be taken lightly. Um, if some of these other laws are violated, maybe that would go to the EEOC. We can help you figure out where to go. But those paths are free. You don't have to hire an attorney. You don't have to have a law degree. You don't have to spend all day, every day doing research and making phone calls. The federal agencies under this administration have been very proactive about working on um, the rights or supporting the rights of pregnant and lactating workers. You can also file a lawsuit in court. I know we all hope that no one's facing a situation so severe that they need to do that, but that option is available. I know if you call the Center for Work-Life Laws helpline, we can help connect you with folks who can represent you if the situation warrants that. Um, but again, we hope it won't get to that point. And I will say probably 9 out of 10 folks, it just takes a little bit of employer education. And so if you go to pregnantatwork.org or betterbalance.org, you'll have access to all of those materials. They can help give you some of that legally language if it's helpful in your situation, or you can call us and we can give you what you need to bring to your employer to help push your case. But if you're getting lost in like the alphabet soup here and which law does which, it's okay. It really shouldn't matter. You don't have to use those magic words. And if you get into a situation where red flags are going up, it feels like your employer is not treating you fairly, you have backup.
Thank you. So I'm sure a lot of folks might be wondering at what point do they, start having these conversations with their employers? Like, should I have this conversation with my employer, around the time that I go on leave, or should I have it much earlier if I'm unsure if, the accommodations and supports I need when I return to work are available to me? And that's open to anyone who will have a response.
I'm happy to jump in first. I think, in general, I think it can be, in terms of lactation specifically, helpful to have the conversation before you return from leave, because you want to make sure that there's a plan in place for the time and the space before returning to work. You can have it before you even go back, before you even go out on leave. If that would help feel like, okay, you can have the plan in place, you're out on leave, and then you can go back knowing what the plan will be. But I do want to stress there's no legal deadline by which you have to tell your employer. So if you decide, you know what, I don't want to do it before I go out on leave, and actually I want to do it right, a week before I'm about to return, that's totally fine. It is, we do talk about it being a good idea to try to, if there are other people in the workplace who have needed time and space before, try to sort of dig for information from them, see if your company has a policy on the books already for lactating employees. Again, talking to coworkers who have pumped before. So there are no fixed times when you need to have the conversation, but it can, really be to your benefit to have the conversation before you come back to work, be that, a week or a couple of weeks before your leave is over, or before you even go out onto leave. And I saw a question in the chat about folks who might not be citizens or might not be documented. And yes, the laws protect them regardless of immigration status.
Just to piggyback on what Sarah said, completely agree. Tell them as soon as you're comfortable telling them. I really don't like seeing people back to work on their first day and they're already in crisis, right? I think for a lot of us, we assume employers should know to prepare that space. But the lactation spaces don't have to be permanent, right? They don't have to have a room that is always and forever designated a lactation space. So I would assume that your employer hasn't thought of it unless you've told them, unfortunately. So you could literally tell them right when you show up on your first day back, but that might mean an incredibly stressful situation for all involved. So to set you up for success, give them as much notice as you're comfortable giving. But to that point, Sarah, you mentioned like check out the policy, see what people are doing for others. I think it's a great point. We make it in our literature, right? Our guidance, but it's really hitting me lately that a lot of employers actually haven't updated their policies yet for this new law. They haven't really. Some employers tell me they're still surprised to hear that there's new laws on the books. So, if you ask around and you get horror stories, other people didn't have lactation space, or maybe they were pumping in the bathroom or their car, or kind of tucked away in a closet somewhere. Please don't feel that that has to be what it's going to be like for you, because things have changed really significantly. And times are different. So what might have been legal for some folks a year ago is not the case now. But if your spidey sense is going off, if you're thinking that maybe this is not a supportive workplace for breastfeeding workers, again, it's always okay to reach out. You can reach out to us before it's a crisis. Know your rights before it's a crisis, and start having these conversations as early as you can.
Thank you. I think I can go down rabbit holes all day with tons of questions. Just thinking. But I'm sure somebody's wondering, is this applied, to students and people who are at colleges and universities, or even, thinking about our younger parents who might still be in high school or GED programs. Does this law also apply to them?
Thank you for asking that. So this is a special point in my heart. I run the Pregnant Scholar Initiative. I'm director of that, pregnantscholar.org, which focuses on the needs of students. Students who are working for their institution, professors, faculty, teachers, anybody who's an employee is covered under these laws. Students, everyone else from K-12, college, grad school, who aren't employees, you're just a student, you have the law called Title IX. And Title IX has had some fuzzy requirements for lactation space, but the Department of Education has just made clear in new guidelines that they're putting out that lactation space that is private, not a bathroom, has to be provided to students as well. So it's a different law, but the rights are the same. You are still entitled to that private space. That's not a bathroom, and the time that you need to use it. So different agencies involved, a whole new set of acronyms and laws involved, but the core for everyone, whether you are 13 or 45, is that you have a right to private, non-bathroom lactation space and the time that you need to use it. And for all of these people, I think a really, really important point to remember is that you should not be penalized for using that, right? So if you're a student, that means you shouldn't be failed or marked down some grades because you had to miss a portion of your class to pump. For a worker, that means your productivity metrics might need to be shifted. You shouldn't be facing any harassment or lowered opportunities because you are pumping on the job. Everyone is entitled to that break time and space, and should be able to use that without fear.
Thank you. And thank you for entertaining all my extra questions. I'm going to kick it off to my favorite policy person and colleague and friend, Cheryl. Cheryl, what supports is available to assure that employers are compliant and compliant with the Pump Act and other laws protecting the rights of lactating workers?
Yeah, thank you so much. This is a great question. I think that the main thing to really keep in mind is that reproduction is a part of the normal human life cycle. It's something that we can anticipate for most workers, and that it's something that can be really easy to anticipate and to prepare for if only you're thinking ahead about it. So we hear from employers all the time, we're like, oh my gosh, we just heard from this employee and we have no idea what to do. I've never been exposed to breast pumping, what that means, like, what do I need to do? And so this law is really going to do a lot to normalize breastfeeding at work, normalize pumping at work and pregnancy at work, and just make this part of the typical flow. As we move through the implementation in this first year of these laws, we're definitely getting questions from employers, and there is support, so don't panic. The U.S. Department of Labor, like my colleagues mentioned, is the agency that's in charge of enforcement of the Pump for Nursing Mothers Act. And they've been doing a really wonderful series of presentations that are actually industry specific. So if you're in the retail industry, if you're in the restaurant industry, if you're in manufacturing, they've prepared presentations that you can find on the DOL website that really gets into what does this mean in that context. You heard reasonable break time in a private non-bathroom space. That looks different in the different work environments, the different types of responsibilities that a given worker has. And there's really flexibility so that you can meet the needs of both the employee as well as for that business. So I definitely recommend checking out the U.S. Department of Labor, look at the resources that they have. They have really great FAQs and fact sheets that can help you kind of think that out. There's also the Office on Women's Health. It might not be a place that a lot of employers are really thinking of, but they have a wonderful resource called the Supporting Nursing Moms at Work resource. And this has lots of examples, photos, really looking at what are real businesses doing all across the country to make this work. We know that there's a lot in it for businesses to provide comprehensive support for their employees. There's a huge return on investment. There's an actual, positive benefit on your bottom line as an employer to provide these protections, reduce turnover, higher customer loyalty, morale, productivity, all of those things research shows are definitely improved when employers are taking the steps to support their employees. It's also the law, but there's definitely something that's in it for employers. So we encourage you to take the time to really think about that. Take a look at what resources are available to you. There are also state breastfeeding coalitions in just about every state, as well as local, tribal, cultural, regional coalitions all across the country. A lot of these coalitions provide one-on-one support for employers when they have questions. So you might really want information about what is the law, what does this mean for my workplace, how can I support this employee, how can I make this work? And they're going to be a great local resource to help you walk through that. Many of those coalitions and a lot of state health departments also have worksite recognition programs. So if your employer is doing, your worksite is doing a really great job of this, look into what you can do to really use this as a marketing tool for your business. And then, see what are the guidelines, what are the supports. There are all kinds of resources. The Center for Health Equity, Education and Resources, they've just published a toolkit that's looking at what are sample workplace policies. The USBC brings together organizations for collaborative work groups, and we're working on an employer toolkit. So you're going to see that in the coming months. Just don't think that you're alone with it. I think a lot of the times it's just a matter of demystifying, understanding what does this mean for my worker. The other thing that I just want to name too is that if you're an employer, you're trying to navigate this, figure out what the laws are, figure out how to make this work in your site, talk to your workers. There's a really good chance that they understand what they need. They understand what is going to be the best solution for them. What is the right space? What is the right timing? How can they make this work? There's a really good chance that they've already thought about this. So I really recommend spending some time just talking to your employees about what would be helpful. I think that, again, we're going to really see a shift. Legislation is a big driver of cultural change, and we're going to see major shifts in kind of the culture around supporting working parents. I know that when my son was born 15 years ago, there was no federal legislation, and it was very different when my daughter was born just a few years later. And now it's like a whole new world, and it's pretty remarkable to think about what my girls are going to experience when they grow up.
Thank you for all of that. And I have additional questions for you, Cheryl. And I know you don't work in WIC, but is there a role that WIC plays in educating families about the Pump Act or any of these other laws that all of you today have shared?
Yeah, I hope that anyone who's working at WIC really understands the incredible the service that you offer and the really important role that you play in breastfeeding. I'm a former WIC mom. WIC staff really were essential to me being able to breastfeed as long as I did. You're really meeting families right at these crucial moments during pregnancy and postpartum. They have so much happening. There's so much they're trying to learn and wrap their minds around this huge lifestyle change. And WIC is there. WIC is providing that support. They're providing that one-on-one. They're providing those touch points that are so important, because maybe you hear about this law, but you don't have children, or you it's not going to stick in your mind the same way as when you're in the moment and really seeing what's going to happen. I think that WIC plays a really important role in educating families about their rights. And of course, it's shifted. It's complicated. You shouldn't have to be a lawyer to breastfeed your baby. But WIC can be there to offer support. I point people all the time to the A Better Balance and Center for Work-Life Law legal helplines. They're free, they're confidential. They're going to offer you the support that you need to really understand the legal landscape. And so if all WIC does is help them understand it's okay to expect this, it's okay to ask for this, and you have these rights under the law, federal, and in a lot of places under state legislation. And if you run into trouble, here's where you can turn. That's a powerful service. That is a powerful thing, because it's really helping parents become advocates for themselves and advocates for their children. And we know that working and breastfeeding are not mutually exclusive. They both can be done. We just have to prepare for it. We just have to really accept that that's part of the norm. So I know that WIC is a really powerful place. WIC was a really important part of the movement to make these laws happen. It did not happen quickly. It did not happen easily. It took more than a decade. So really grateful for all that WIC has done to really spread the word and to be a conduit of information.
Thank you.
Cheryl, I'm getting choked up here.
I know. I was just about to say, Cheryl, like you can always see your passion and your love for all of this because it always shines through and you know, in your physical, but also through the work that you do every day. So thank you for all your sacrifice, sacrificing all of those around you, because those around you are also making sacrifices to help support you as you go out here and do this work every day. And all the rest of you as well, not just Cheryl, everyone on this panel. But sorry, go ahead, Jess.
Yeah, no, I was just gonna say everything you said, Cheryl. It's so, so true. So WIC, please shout it from the rooftops. If you want the in-depth training on this, I know this is kind of a whirlwind tour of these laws, call us. I know the folks here, our organizations and our partner organizations in the states are very eager to train you, help you feel confident in your understanding of the law. But as Cheryl said, the biggest thing that you can do is just spread the word. People need to know that this is possible. I see a lot of moms, frankly, who've given up on the idea of pumping and working because they've heard these nightmare stories, right? They think it's just going to be too hard. They think they can't do it. And you know, some people are going to make that choice, but they need to know that there is a path now. They need to know that the law finally has their back and that there is the support. And yeah, I'm a former WIC kid, right? Like we grow up and do amazing things. Cheryl, I know you and your family are growing up and doing amazing things. But we need to know the amazing possibilities that are out there to empower us to have that that courage to step forward in these situations that often don't seem welcoming. So I hope that you will spread the word, and please don't hesitate to reach out to us if you need more help to be able to do that.
Thanks for putting that out there, Jess. I think you just signed all of you up for a workshop via NWA. So don't be surprised if we reach out to you. I'll ask Sarah. Sarah, what resources are available if people want to learn more? And I know you already shared about the helplines, but are there any additional resources that folks can tap into or should be aware of?
Yeah. Well, I want to shout out USB-C too, because they've done a really good job sort of culling together a lot of these resources. So if you go to USB-C's site, you'll see just a lot of information about various resources that you can tap into, information about both helplines, information about the talking to your boss about your pump sheets, sort of shorter fact sheets that many of our organizations worked on together. So it's a really great hub for all the resources. The other thing is that the Department of Labor has put out their own FAQs on the Pump Act. And then they also put out this longer guidance called the Field Bulletin. Now, it's a pretty, like, it's very in the weeds. But the reason why I mentioned it is because sometimes employers will respond more quickly to information that comes from a government agency. And so I want folks to just be aware that those exist. And so if someone's going to their employer and trying to fight for their rights, it can be helpful to come in with some of that agency information. Again, I think we'll follow up afterwards with all of this for folks. And then I really do want to underscore taking us up on the offer about doing additional trainings for WIC staff, for whom it might be top of mind. we I have colleagues in New York that do regular WIC trainings, because just to underscore what Cheryl and Jess and everyone have said, I mean, like moms really trust WIC, and they're coming at this really amazing and scary and exciting time. And WIC is often the first place that people go, and the trust that folks have in WIC is incredible in a way that, talking to a lawyer, like everyone knows lawyers aren't known as the warmest and fuzziest, though I have to say a Better Balance and Center for Work-Life Law lawyers are just extremely friendly and nice and wonderful. But we know that sometimes it can feel scary to call a lawyer. And so it feels much better to talk to someone at WIC. And to the extent that we can provide that information, and folks at WIC can feel like, okay, we got this, we can provide this information, and get people the help they need in a lower key way at a time when people are being given tons of information. We want to help facilitate that in the most feasible, easy, user-friendly way possible. So really just want to underscore that, and could not be a bigger fan of WIC and the amazing, amazing, amazing work. So those are some of the resources. I'll turn it over to others for more information and resources.
I'll just add that there are, again, I talked about state breastfeeding coalitions, health departments, just because they are such a wonderful resource. So a lot of times you're going to have state-specific resources that are available through those. There might not be the top of mind that you're thinking of. So take a moment to Google. The Center for Work-Life Law, A Better Balance, 1,000 Days, all do all kinds of great stuff. Even just on social media, they're really doing a lot to spread the word. And you can find resources available through all kinds of USBC member organizations. So the USBC serves as an organization of organizations. So a lot of times you can reach out to us. We might not be the experts in a thing, but we may be able to point you to the right resource, whether it's WIC, whether it's 1,000 Days, or otherwise. AAP has all kinds of resources and that kind of a thing. So please do reach out. Don't hesitate. You're not alone in this. Becoming a parent is hard, and there's a lot of support, and we want to make it as lovely as it can be.
All right, so we have a few more minutes, so I'm going to go down my rabbit hole again, and ask, if I'm an employer, like what type of space do I need to provide, and do I have to pay my employees for this additional break time that they may need to support, their parenting and feeding choices? And I'll open that to whoever wants to answer.
Okay, I'll jump in. I feel like I've been hogging the mic a little bit. But yeah, in terms of the space, number one, it should not be a bathroom. Number two, it needs to be free from intrusion. So that could look like a lock on the door, a sign that people actually respect. And it should be free from view. So that could mean putting a curtain over a window. Maybe you have a door with a window in it, or it's a conference room that people can see into. Put up some curtains or film to make it hard to see. That also means things like covering up cameras, or permission to turn a camera off if you're a remote worker. So those are the core ingredients, but the Department of Labor has been really clear that the space needs to be functional. So that means it should have somewhere for the worker to sit, go figure, and a flat surface like a table so that they can put the pump on it. If there's electricity available at that worksite, right, it should have electrical outlet. Ideally, I'm sure Cheryl could give you a whole book on this, but ideally the space should also be near a sink, right? Easy to get to. And the bottom line that we share for employers is the better the lactation space, the more convenient and accessible it is, the sooner your workers are going to be able to get back to doing their job. So it's in everyone's interest to make that space accessible, and a place where people can feel safe and comfortable expressing milk. Yeah.
Awesome. Anyone else want to add to that?
I think the only thing that's coming up for me is like safety and cleanliness. So we've unfortunately heard a lot of horror stories about employees being asked to pump in spaces that are they're just not clean, or they're very hot, or they're very cold. So keep that in mind. Like, what's comfortable? Do they have a place to sit, a place to set their pump? If they need to plug in a pump, is there a place to do so? But also, what is the environment? Like, if you really want to reap the rewards of the return on investment as an employer, it might be worth making that space just a little bit nicer.
Great.
I think Jess, did you speak to the compensation piece? Okay. So just on the question about compensation, so like Stephanie mentioned at the beginning, there are situations. Well, let's start with point number one. Point number one is if you are working while you are pumping, right? So if you're in the space, but you bring your laptop in with you, and so you're actually performing any manner of work duties while you're pumping, your employer has to pay you for those breaks because you are working. In certain instances, an employer can take you off the clock during your pumping breaks. So if you're an hourly worker and you're fully on a break, you're not performing any work duties, they can take you off the clock. A salaried worker, the Department of Labor has been pretty clear, your pay can't be reduced if you are pumping. And so it sometimes can get a little bit complicated. This is an area where, the next frontier, we can think about just making very clear that all breaks for pumping need to be paid. But if folks have questions about that and particular situations, we're here to answer them. But it's sort of, number one, if you are performing any work duties as an hourly worker, you must be paid. If you're an hourly worker not performing any duties, there are situations you can be taken off the clock. If you're a salaried worker, you really cannot have your pay reduced for pumping.
Thank you. Well, with that, we are at our time. We have come to the end of our panel discussion. I want to thank you all again for bringing not just your expertise in this field, in this work, and in policy around pregnancy and lactation, but also bringing your passion and your sacrifices that you make every day to support families across the nation and beyond. So I appreciate you. So I express my sincere gratitude to Stephanie, Cheryl, Sarah, and Jessica. And on behalf of the National WIC Association, I want to thank all of you who have joined today's discussion. And thank you for all the work that you continue to do. Thank you for being here to learn about new resources on how to support your pregnant and lactating families. We appreciate you. Have a great day.
Thank you so much, Stacy. You're a gem, and I'm so glad. This has been wonderful.
Awesome.
Thank you,
Thank you,
Stacey.
guys.
Thank you. Go WIC.
Go WIC.